How many of you recognize this corporate logo right here? Some of you, I'm sure, have seen this logo before, depending on your age, I guess. But do you remember whose company logo this is? You know? There you go. You bet. For the first half of the 20th century, the RCA Victor Company had one of the world's most well-known corporate logos, as seen here. It's a picture of a dog sitting in front of a sound horn, and that's what that's called. That's a big sound horn that comes off that, of an early gramophone machine. And if you look, the dog's head is just inches from the horn, with its head kind of cocked to one side. You know, it's as if he's listening intently to the recording being played, right? Like he's enjoying the music, right? It seems that this image, which became an international logo, has a unique backstory that some of you may know, some of you may not know, but I'm going to share that with you this morning. It's going to lead us where we're going today. It appears an Englishman, Mark Bernard, owned a terrier mixed dog named Nipper in the late 19th century. When Bernard died in 1887, his brother, an artist named Francis Bernard, inherited Nipper. He also inherited from Mark an early cylinder phonograph machine, the kind invented by Thomas Edison, and some of the early cylinder recordings, audio recordings that he left for him. And tradition says that one of those recordings was the voice of Mark Bernard, Nipper's original owner. Supposedly, after his master's death, Nipper would sit in front of the horn on the phonograph machine and listen to the recording of his deceased master's voice. Whether Nipper was listening to his deceased master's voice or music, Francis Bernard noted the dog's attentiveness to it and to the sound coming from the cylinder phonograph machine, and he painted a picture, which became this world-famous logo. And this is what Ron pulled up and found today. This is the painted version of that logo, and it's been reproduced many times. Francis Bernard titled the painting His Master's Voice. In 1899, Francis copyrighted the painting and sold the image to the Gramophone Company in England. And the Gramophone Company used the image of Nipper listening to the gramophone as its corporate logo. And after a series of corporate mergers and acquisitions, the Master's Voice logo became the property of the American Victor Talking Machine Company in 1901, which ultimately became RCA Victor. And the image of Nipper listening to his master's voice became one of the most widely recognized corporate logos in modern history. Just as many of you, when you see it, you know that's RCA. Many of you do. Like I say, and younger kids may not grab hold of that, but many of us, my age and probably above, or maybe a little below, the minute you see that, you know that's RCA. And Francis captured perfectly the attentive, quizzical posture dogs can display. Ears cocked, head tilted a little to one side, and fully focused. Even if Nipper was not listening to his original master voice, the painting itself captures the possibility that he was listening to that and his longing to hear his master's voice once again. You know, Dr. David Jeremiah contributed this story about this logo, and as I've read, it's been recreated several times and redone, but I liked his version. Not sure what kind of dog it is. Is that what it is? Oh, okay. At least it's not a beagle. We have one. Looks like a walking propane tank. It gets on our nerves. This morning, Terry said, she just drives us crazy. I said, tell her right now that we're going to give her to a Chinese family and she can be on a stick over a fire any minute. So I'm sorry, that was bad. She said, that's not a pretty visual. She's fat. Jesus said in John 10:27, my sheep listen to my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. This story about Nipper could remind us of the interaction between Mary Magdalene and Jesus on Easter Sunday morning. When Mary didn't recognize Jesus when she first saw him because she was looking at him through her grieving tears at that time. So she didn't recognize him. It wasn't until the Lord spoke her name that she was startled into recognition of who he was. You know, there's a major problem today, as it was in the past, that occurs. And the problem is called deaf sheep. Deaf sheep, they just don't hear. You know, Jerry Clyer, comedian Jerry Clyer, many of you know him. He tells the story of a man that was walking down the road and not paying attention and on a mountaintop, and he walked off the mountaintop. And he grabbed a limb, and he's hanging on the side of the mountaintop, hollering for help, calling out for help. He's in trouble. It's a long ways down. So as he calls out for help, a deep voice said, have faith and let go. So once again, he called out for help. And that voice said once again, have faith and let go. The gentleman finally said, is there anybody else up there? He heard the voice, but he didn't respond to the voice. I think many times we can find ourselves the same way. It is amazing to me why some people seem never to hear the voice of the Master. And why some seem to wander off into all kinds of dangerous and foolish situations because not listening to the Master's voice. Some may even go to their grave without ever hearing his voice. And it seems there's a parallel between learning to speak a language and learning to hear and act as a person of faith. Join me in John, the book of John, chapter 10, verse 22 this morning. John chapter 10, beginning at verse 22. Then came the festival of dedication at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade. The Jews who were there gathered around him, saying, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. Jesus answered, I did tell you, but you do not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me, but you do not believe because you are not my sheep. My sheep listen to my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. Amen. Right here we find there is security for Jesus' sheep because he watches over them. He looks after them. And the one thing that marks Christians as Jesus' sheep is that they hear his voice. Amen. They know their master's voice. And if we don't listen to his voice, how can we follow him? How can we be a follower of Jesus Christ if we don't listen to his voice? We just need to be sensitive to the Lord's voice in an attempt to hear what he's saying. Jesus says several times in the Bible, whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Luke 14:35. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. Matthew 11:15. Whoever has ears, let him hear. Matthew 13:9. Whoever has ears, let him hear. Matthew 13:43. Whoever has ears, let him hear. He just repeats over and over again. Mark 4:9. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. He's telling us, he gave us ears. right? Are we listening? And the thing is, we need to slow down. We need to slow down our lives and be still long enough to hear the Master's call. Rather find a quiet, still place where God's voice can be heard and not interrupted by the busyness of the world around us. Because many times we get so active and so busy, it's hard to find a still, quiet place where we can be one-on-one with God. We do our prayers, but do we wait on the reply? Romans chapter 10, verse 17 says, consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. Through the word. And the Bible encourages us to be still. Psalms 46:10, he says, be still and know I am God. Be still. Psalms 37:7, be still before the Lord and wait patiently on him. You know, when we cry out to the Lord or we go to him in prayer, we want an immediate response. That's satisfaction for us. We want to know right now. What do you got to say about this? We're not going to be patient. We're in a hurry. We got to hear the answer and move on. Sometimes we think we heard the answer that we wanted to hear, right? It's kind of like I said, the little devil on one shoulder, God on the other, and they're both in your ear. But who are we listening to? And are we taking time to listen and understand what's going on? The only way we're going to be able to hear the Master's voice is by being still long enough to hear him speak to us. And one of the greatest benefits of our salvation has to be that of hearing God speak to us personally. There can be no intimate relationship with God without that. Think about that. And just because it's easy for us to speak to God, you know, we may not be able to pray out loud in front of people. That bothers some people. But just because it's easy for us to speak to God, and it is. You can speak to God anytime, any place, any way, right? So it's easy for us to speak to God. Did you know the average Christian has a hard time hearing God's voice? The average Christian. I assure you, this is not the way that the Lord intended it to be. That's not what he intended. Learning to clearly distinguish God's voice is invaluable to all of us. There isn't a single person here today that couldn't have their life transformed by hearing the voice of the Lord better than they do. The worst problem of one's life is one word from the Lord solving the problem that quick. One word, just you could hear that one word could solve a problem going on in your life today. If we have sickness or disease, we are one living word from the Lord healing us instantly. And if we find ourselves in a financial crisis, the Lord knows exactly how to turn our situation around. Knows exactly how to do that. It's just a matter of hearing his voice. You know, the Lord constantly speaks to us. He constantly gives us direction. It's never the Lord not speaking to us, because he's willing to speak to us if we're willing to listen. But it's us. We're just not hearing him. Remember the problem with this? Deaf sheep. Once there was a man who dared God to speak. He said, burn the bush like you did for Moses, God, and I will follow. Collapse the walls like you did for Joshua, God, and I will fight. Still the waves like you did on Galilee, God, I will listen. And so the man sat by a bush near a wall close to the sea and waited for God to speak. Since God heard the man, he answered. He sent fire, not for a bush, but for a church. He brought down a wall, not of brick, but of sin. And he stilled the storm not of the seed, but of a soul. And God waited for the man to respond. And he waited, and he waited, and he waited. But because the man was looking at the bushes, not hearts, bricks and not lives, seas and not souls, he decided that God had done nothing. Finally, he looked to God and asked, "Have you lost your power?" And God looked at him and said, "Have you lost your hearing?" Amen. Are you listening? It all comes down to listening. And I know there are people here today that will say, "I have never heard God audibly. I've never heard God audibly talk to me," and that's okay. That's okay. Because in the past, the Bible tells us that God speaks to people in different ways. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 1, we're not going to look at every scripture, but I'm going to break it down for you. God spoke to Moses through a burning bush. That's Exodus chapter 3, verse 1 through 4. In 2 Samuel 12, the Lord spoke to David through another person named Nathan. This is my favorite one. In Numbers chapter 22, 21, God spoke to Balaam through a donkey. That'll get your attention, amen. You might even listen or run. And he spoke to Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel 4:4 in a dream. And in Acts 16:6, the Lord spoke to Paul and his companions through the Holy Spirit, and Paul through a vision. So just because you don't hear God audibly doesn't mean he's not speaking to you. He comes to us, speaks to us through many different ways. Many of you probably can testify, "Hey, I had a dream. You know, I had a dream that God was telling me to do this." Or I had a vision. Or someone spoke this to me, and I believe it came right from the Lord. So God uses all different means to reach us and speak to us. But are we listening? When I say are we listening, well, you say, "Well, he's not talking to me audibly." Just like this man we just talked about. Are you looking for the signs? Are you realizing how God speaks to us with compassion, grace, and love in all situations? So according to the Bible, God has the ability to speak to us through many different ways. But if we are not too busy and do not have a personal relationship with the Lord, we're not going to hear him. If we're really busy doing what we're doing, we got the TV on, the music up, the world around us. Do you realize that in these big cities, do you realize how much noise there is every day in a big city? Well, that's why sometimes you got to find that quiet, still place. Get out in the country, get away, get by yourself. Get on one-on-one with the Lord. But if you're going to cry out to him, you're going to pray to him, give him time to speak back to you. Don't rush it. It's all about God's timing, not ours. Hearing God sometimes just comes right into your heart. You know, it's a movement you can't control. Have you ever found yourself just driving down the road and something, no matter what, it's really, really quiet, and the next thing you know, you're just in tears. You're just in tears, and you don't know what's going on. Guys aren't going to raise their hand and say that, but I've been there. I've been there. You know, there's not very many men going to admit that, but I've been there, and you can't really justify what's going on. I tell the story about before I started preaching and helping out at churches, and before I ever became a pastor, I was on a fishing trip with Brother Gary Morgan and a bunch of guys out in New Mexico, a long ways out there. I rode with Brother Gary and a couple other guys, and we had a great time, went out and fished. And coming back, there were some things talked about and things going on, and I don't know, somewhere between Texas and in Mexico, I was just sitting there in tears. I don't know what was going on. God was speaking to me, but I didn't like what he was saying. I didn't like what he was asking me to do. And Brother Gary turned around and looked at me, and I was just in tears. Couldn't explain what was going on. And he said, "You're going to be a pastor." I wanted to argue with him. God has a way of speaking. I just think it, just like most times, I didn't want to listen. But thank God I did. Changed my life. Changed my family's life. Because of obedience. When you listen to the Lord, you have to be obedient. And where he's taking you and what he wants you to do. However God chooses to speak to us, when he does, it requires a response. Don't just sit there. When we sense or hear God speaking to us, our response should be, "Here I am." Or as Andy Griffin would say, "I was right here." Right? Acknowledge it. Be prepared. So maybe he's calling you this morning for something. What is he saying to you? Some of you sitting here today, I'm sure he's speaking to you. Because he loves to speak to us. And he loves us speaking back to him. May just be sitting there making you very uncomfortable, because I hear that a lot when people walk out the back door. "Hey, you were stepping on my toes today." No, that was God's feet. Right? He's talking to you. Maybe he's calling you to lead a ministry or to serve in the church. Maybe he's trying to speak to you about the sin in your life or the direction you're headed, which is not good. Whatever the Lord might be saying to us today, we should be just like that little dog right there, Nipper. Let us be still. Turn our ears and our focus to our Master's voice to discern what it is he's trying to tell us. Be still and know that I am God. Let's pray. Father God, we come to you this morning. We lift this morning to you, Father. Father, I know from times we struggle just trying to hear from you. And Father, because we live in a sinless world, a sinful world, we don't want to take the advice or hear what it is you have us to hear or have us do. But I pray this morning, Father, that we would turn our ear to you, that we would listen to your voice and what it is you would lead us to do or say in situations. Father, as we're being called to a ministry, Father, I pray that our minds are open, our hearts are open, and we're willing to respond to you and where it is you'd have us go and what you'd have us do. Father, your word tells us you never send us. You equip us and then send us. So, Father, we should be ready to go, ready to do what is your will. Father, I pray today more people will turn down the sound. Get in a quiet place and be still. Get in a one-on-one relationship with you, Father, and get intimate so that they might hear your voice in everything they do. Father, we love you and praise you. Pray today that everything we did, everything we said, uplifting, glorifying, and pleasing to you. We ask this in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen.